What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about 3 running backs that are currently being drafted as running back 3s, but I think have the upside to be top 12 running backs this year for fantasy. I did a similar video yesterday with the wide receivers, and I actually did a similar video with the running backs last year, and 3 of the 5 running backs I talked about were Rachaad White, James Conner, and Alvin Kamara. All 3 of those dudes ended up finishing top 12. So the same video I did last year, we had some success. Hopefully we can continue that here with this video. Honestly, this year, I think it's a little bit more thin looking at the running back 3s, so I don't feel great about picking 5. So this video is just going to be held to 3 players, but I do think these guys do have some upside this year. So we're going to start off with Raheem Mostert, and he just barely makes the cut here as the running back 25. And I don't actually think the argument for Raheem Mostert is too tough because last year he was the running back 4 in points per game. So we're just one season removed from him actually being a running back 1 for fantasy. Now, I'm not really expecting Raheem Mostert to go out and replicate his 17.8 point per game season. Looking at his entire career, it was a pretty significant outlier. He also led the NFL with 21 touchdowns in 15 games. Tough to expect him, to put together another 20-plus touchdown season, but I do think this Dolphins offense is just like the perfect environment for running backs. Mostert averaged nearly 18 PPR points per game with a 53% opportunity share. Like, it's not like he was RB1 because he was just being force-fed a million touches, a workload that's not sustainable. He was barely getting 50% of the backfield when he was playing. Now, I do expect Achane to kind of eat into that. I do expect Achane to probably lead this backfield in opportunities, but it's not like you're looking at Mostert going from 70% opportunity share to like sub 50%. If he's going from like 53 to like 48, 47, it's still not a massive drop-off from what he saw last year, and I don't think the Dolphins want to go out and force-feed Devon Achane. He's super fast, he's super efficient, but he's also a very small back, so I don't think they're going to run Achane into the ground. I still expect Raheem Mostert to be very involved, and I think it's going to be a pretty solid split between these two. And interestingly enough, last year, even though Achane, was banged up throughout the season, Mostert actually averaged more points per game playing with Achane than with Achane out of the lineup. He averaged 18.8 PPR points per game with Devon Achane, 17 without him. Now, it is a little bit skewed because he had like the one monster game when they played Denver where Mostert and Achane had just like nuclear days, but it's not like his production completely tanked when Achane was in there healthy with him, splitting the opportunities. Like I said earlier, I'm not expecting the 21 touchdowns, but this is still a backfield that scored 34 touchdowns last year, and Mostert was 5th in red zone touches. So even though that opportunity share wasn't there when they were near the goal line, in the red zone, Mostert was getting the ball. And it's not like Tua got really unlucky with like his touchdown luck. He threw for 29 passing touchdowns. So I just think this is an offense that's going to put up a lot of points. They're going to break off a lot of big runs, and I think pretty much everyone within this offense is going to eat. So even though I think Mostert's production is going to dip a little bit, I still think he could end up slotting in as like a back-end running back 1 this year. I would not be shocked if we saw Achane and Mostert repeat as running back 1s. Now, the next running back here is going to be Zach Moss. He's being drafted as the running back 27, and this is just a pretty ambiguous backfield here for the Bengals. Joe Mixon's gone. They signed Zach Moss in free agency, and they pretty much made like no other notable moves. It's not like they went in, made a big trade or signed like a massive name free agent. They pretty much, Mixon's out the door, Zach Moss is in, and they're running it back with what they had last year. Now, typically, when you have a running back who signs for 2 years, $8 million, they're normally not stepping into an offense, especially like a good offense, and looking like the favorite to lead the backfield, but that's kind of what we have here with Zach Moss. This is a pretty weak running back room behind him. You have Travion Williams and Chris Evans as the running back 3 and 4 on the depth chart. Travion Williams has 62 total carries in 4 seasons. Chris Evans has 19 total carries in his 3-year NFL career, and last year he had 12 rushing yards, -1 receiving yards, so I'm not really concerned about either of those two. I think the main competition for touches with Zach Moss is going to be Chase Brown. He's a 5th-round pick from last year, heading into year 2. Solid size, really good athlete, can catch passes, so there are some things to like here with Chase Brown. He had a solid rookie year, 44 carries, 179 rushing yards, 14 receptions, 156 receiving yards, and a touchdown. So maybe Chase Brown ends up being the guy to lead this backfield. I actually don't really hate Chase Brown at his current price. But I do think right now we should probably view Zach Moss as like the favorite to lead this backfield in touches. In his first 3 seasons, Zach Moss was used as more of like a complementary back. We saw him in Buffalo kind of playing alongside Devin Singletary, but not really leading that backfield. But he really got the opportunity to lead a backfield early in 2023 with Jonathan Taylor missing the first 4 games of the season. So Zach Moss was actually injured week 1, but then week 2, he pretty much just stepped into like a workhorse role. Week 2 and week 3, he put up 20 plus PPR points, had over 100 scrimmage yards in both of those games, also scored a touchdown in each. Didn't do anything crazy in week 4, but still had a solid workload. And then we saw JT return in week 5, but they were kind of easing him back into the lineup. They didn't give JT this massive workload. And that's where we actually saw the biggest game out of Zach Moss. Went for nearly 200 scrimmage yards, was at 195, got into the end zone twice, 33.5 PPR points. He was also very efficient with his opportunities throughout the entire season. He was 5th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. Looking at some of the other running backs that finished up there, that's definitely great company here for Zach Moss. So when he did get the opportunity to be the lead back, he performed very well. Now, albeit, it was a small sample size, but at the very least, it's encouraging here for Zach Moss, heading into a situation where he could lead another backfield. The Bengals are coming off a season where they absolutely force-fed Joe Mixon. He had the 3rd highest opportunity share. That's kind of been the story of Mixon's career. The Bengals have given him a lot of opportunities. He hasn't been the most efficient guy, but he's been slotted in as the running back 1, and they have just fed him the ball. Mixon also ended up being the running back 11 in points per game. So we saw a running back 1 season out of the Bengals running back 1 last year. Now you could say, Zach Moss probably isn't going to have the 3rd highest opportunity share. Even if he's leading this backfield, Chase Brown will still likely be working in. And I agree with that, but I think we also have to consider that last year's Bengals offense is not the same offense that we should be getting this year. Joe Burrow was hurt, and that really stifled the ceiling of this offense. If Joe Burrow's healthy, there should be more touchdown upside for these running backs. The backfield should be more efficient overall, both in the receiving game and on the ground. And so if Zach Moss can go out, lock down that running back 1 role, I do think he can end up being a top 12 fantasy running back and is one of the more interesting options, of those guys who has the upside going outside the top 24 running backs. And then the 3rd and final running back 3 that I think can be a running back 1, I've talked about him a ton already. It's Jonathan Brooks. He's going off the board as the running back 28. And I'm not going to go crazy in depth because I don't want to repeat myself in like every Jonathan Brooks video. But he was an impressive overall prospect. He got drafted round 2 in this year's draft, which, round 2 capital for a running back in general is solid. But especially for a running back coming off a torn ACL, you factor in that injury risk, and to think he still went in round 2, that's a very good sign for Jonathan Brooks. Now that ACL injury is what's going to scare everyone away from him. That's why he's not going, as like a mid-tier RB2 or higher, because if that ACL wasn't there, I think he'd be locked in as like a top 20 running back. You could argue him maybe as high as like a back-end RB1 if he wasn't injured heading into this season. But when we're talking about, buying in on players coming off a torn ACL, I'm way more willing to invest in them if the player is young and an impressive athlete. Jonathan Brooks checks both of those boxes. It's a similar reason why I was in on Breece Hall last year. That definitely panned out. Plus, all the reports we've been getting about his medicals have been very positive. The Panthers' new head coach, Dave Canales, used Rachaad White with the Bucs last year as like a complete workhorse, just force-fed him the ball. I think Jonathan Brooks is a much more talented running back than Rachaad White. He's already talked about wanting to get Jonathan Brooks involved in open space, using him, heavily as a pass catcher, which for fantasy and fantasy upside is key. And I think even if he gets off to a slow start with the ACL, like I'm not making the argument that Jonathan Brooks is going to come in, be a workhorse from day 1, just dominate the touches, from day 1, week 1. I don't think that's going to happen. I think early on it's going to be somewhat of a committee. Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders working their way in. But I think Jonathan Brooks is going to be a guy that once he unlocks that workload, week 4, week 5 area, I think he's going to be someone who can really just tear it up to end the season and kind of backload his way to a running back 1 fantasy season. So those are going to be the 3 running backs I'm looking at here: Raheem Mostert, Zach Moss, and Jonathan Brooks. Like I kind of mentioned at the top of this video, I don't think it's the best year for upside, like outside the top 24 running backs, at least in terms of guys who don't need an injury to produce. Looking at some of the players going in like that RB3 range, you have the committees for the Steelers with guys like Najee Harris, Jalen Warren. You have the Titans committee with Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears. Commanders committee going like back end of round 3, or sorry, back end of like the RB3 territory. So it is kind of crowded with guys in committees. I think, maybe those guys have RB2 upside if they lead the committee, but I don't think without an injury, any of those players are like breaking into RB1 territory. So those are my thoughts. Let me know your opinions on these three players. Do you agree they have some upside? Are there any players that I didn't mention that you would like to throw in there? I'd love to hear it. Also, check out the wide receiver video if you haven't seen it already. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.